Hello, how you doing, Hugh?
Hi, Greg.
So it's 10/28 and the full moon for October. It's getting close to the anniversary of your wife Victoria's death. So I know you want to talk about that again this year. I believe we talked about the same thing about this time last year. And I understand you got some pictures you want to share also. And of course, I know a few things about her that you told me. Her muscular dystrophy and her being the poster child for multiple sclerosis, and the Jerry Lewis telethon out there on the Boblo boats there in Michigan around Detroit. And just that alone should make her should she should be in the news from what everything that happened to her. But neither Jerry Lewis's telethon didn't help her, and uh, it was never put in the news at all. Not even allowed an obituary in Tennessee, where it ultimately happened. So a lot of tragic news here, and I'll just leave it to you from this point.
Well, when I was 4 years old in 1957, Gary and Ed Osborn and Daryl Hall kidnapped me with my twin, and my twin was brought back to California, or brought back from California with Camille Sirhan. I found myself seated in kindergarten with Camille Sirhan and my twin, my identical twin. And Camille Sirhan was crying. She missed her father. So I gave her a hug and I said, I miss my mom and dad too. And at that point, Mrs. Long and Miss Wallace and Stoltz, they handed me over to the pedophiles who chained me to a pole on a toilet and then tortured me and beat my twin to death. And that was Osborne, Anderson, Andrews, Daryl Hall. And Osborne had been the governor of Michigan. He always ran against my family, Baldwin.
Right.
And they beat my twin to death, 5 grown gay men. And they gangbanged him after killing him. And I escaped out a window when somebody knocked on a back door. They all ran upstairs and left me unchained. And I climbed out a basement window. And I was a mess. They tortured me by making me stay on my knees and beating my thighs with 2x4s and demanding sex. And they told me they were going to murder me and stuff me like animals all over their house. The Osborne family were taxidermists. And I ran right by Elbrooks Patterson's car, and he was out in the driveway while my twin was murdered and I was raped by Osborne and the others. Long was a governor. Wallace was a governor. Schultz became Peanuts cartoon. Anderson and Andrews, Judge Andrews was the first judge on TV in Detroit. And all these people raped me. And not one time, over and over, many times. Throughout my life, these people. And Patterson, when I told his nephew, Ted Oglesby, his mother was Mrs. Patterson. She married a Mr. Oglesby. In school, I told him that Elbrooks Patterson was sitting outside as my twin was murdered and I was tortured and raped. And he went home that night and told his uncle, and his own uncle in Oakland County hung him in a belt in one of his jail cells. And I never saw Ted again. And they did that to him when he was about 17 years old.
Yeah.
I've always regretted telling anybody about this. After the murders of 4 of my wives and my children, I I decided to tell the world my truth. At the same time, Patterson murdered Ted Oglesby, another Patterson, and my cousin, Sheriff Patterson and Sheriff Perry, and Perry's my cousin through a marriage, were taking hookers to Bill Clinton as he was governor of Arkansas. And the Patterson family, I mean, this is who they are. Patterson was a prosecutor and a policeman, and another sheriff named Patterson was delivering hookers to Bill Clinton. Now,
Right.
4 military men killed my wife on Halloween Eve.
Yeah. Okay.
And they did it in Johnson City Hospital after I found her murdered at our home. I gave her CPR and revived her. And when I first moved to Tennessee, I got a home on Lynn Avenue next to the Greenville Sun owner, Alex Jones III. And he never published any of my wife's murders. And there's 4 wives who were dismembered and murdered. 2
Right.
of them on my ranch, 3 of them while I lived on the ranch. And then a 4th was murdered as the FBI shot Lavoy Finicum. Nancy Lavoy was murdered, dismembered and murdered. Bobby Walters, he was in Vietnam, and I rented a house from his girlfriend, Darlene, or his wife, Darlene Walters. And he came to me one day and he asked me to burn his houses down. He wanted me to commit arson in 2 of his houses and his other properties. And in Tennessee, Walters State College is the Walters family. And he offered me 10 grand every time I'd burn one of his properties down. And I told Mr. Walters, I said no. And then I immediately went across the street to the Anderson house. Patsy and her husband, Mr. Anderson, were my friends. And I told them that the Walters family asked me to commit arson at their houses. And it wasn't long after that, both Patsy and Mr. Anderson were dead. And I'm pretty sure Bobby Walters murdered them because I had told them he wanted me to commit arson on his properties.
Yes.
So he was in Vietnam. He was a soldier in Vietnam. And 4 military men murdered my wife. My wife is here behind me. That's Victoria. And I married her in Greenville at the First United Methodist Church across the street from what was Andrew Johnson Museum there on Main Street. And the four people from the military who helped murder Victoria was Bobby Walters and Dr. Twine, who has a practice there, and he was in the mill. He was an Army doctor, and then Major Tom Garrett at CBS, and then sheriff who was watching over my wife in Johnson City Hospital. He was in the military, and he did nothing to stop her murder. Dr. Twine, when I married Victoria, we found her Dr. Twine, a military doctor. He's one of the few doctors in Greenville, Tennessee. He put Victoria on a pill that destroys, in the 3rd trimester of taking the pill, it destroys your internal organs. And he didn't tell Victoria he did that, and he didn't tell me he did that. And there was no reason for him to do that because there was nothing wrong with her. I believe he collected a big sum of money for giving her that pill, which it destroyed her heart, her kidneys, and her upper colon and stomach. She had to get a pacemaker. Her kidneys failed. She had to go to the bathroom 60 times a day. And that's all due to the fact that a doctor gave her a pill that destroys your internal organs. And he never told her he was doing that. And he never told me. He just did it. And Victoria, you can see she was walking. She had a job working at Winco when he put her on that pill for absolutely no reason, other than so he could collect a commission check. So Victoria ended up with a pacemaker and a defibrillator when her heart went out. I had to get her kidney doctors, and they were setting her up for a kidney transplant on the day she was murdered. Now, on the day she was murdered, as Dr. Twine put her on this pill that destroyed her internal organs, the renegades and the outlaws built a biker club at the end of the street where I lived, on Grassy Creek, just halfway in Greenville and halfway in Mossheim, Tennessee. And it was a secluded ranch. My nearest neighbor was about a quarter of a mile to a half a mile away. And after they got the bike club made, every night somebody would come and run a shovel around my brick home. And I would call the police, and they'd come out and they'd try to tell me it was my gutters, and aluminum doesn't sound like a metal, an iron shovel on brick. And the police that would come out for the break-ins and the shovel being run around the home at 2 and 3 and 4 in the morning. And it was always run around Victoria's bedroom. One night the shovel was run around her bedroom. I went in her bedroom and found her dead. I revived her with CPR and called an ambulance.
There was a hose through her window, right? Some sort of gas.
Yeah. And while I took her to the hospital, somebody broke into my home and stole all the computers, hard drives that Tom Garrett had sent to me from Obama's White House. Major Tom Garrett was Obama's journalist from CBS in the White House. And then Victoria was in the hospital after I gave her CPR, sitting up waiting to come home. Yeah. I was supposed to come in and take her the next day. They scheduled her for a new battery in her pacemaker. And while she was unconscious, after getting the new battery put in, 2 nurses at Johnson City sodomized her. And then she had to get transfusions for a month because they hurt her lower colon, sodomizing her. And I told the doctors, and the doctors denied it. But then on her hospital records, another doctor come in and looked at her and said, yeah, she was sodomized and raped. A Dr. Myers did that. And that paperwork will be in the book you publish.
Right.
My wife's advocate in Johnson City was Bobby Walters' family. Mrs. Walters was my wife's advocate. And one night, as she's getting these transfusions because she was sodomized, somebody went into her room with the advocate's phone and screamed Slater over the phone as they cut her ears off. And I had to bury her minus her ears because whoever did it took them. And I asked the doctor and all the nurses about her ears being missing, and none of them had an answer. They just told me pressure did that. And I said, well, that's a no-brainer, There was nothing wrong with my wife's ears, and she wasn't wearing earrings. Somebody cut her ears off and took them. They earmarked her. And that's something the military does. They'll cut somebody's ear off and take it It's called earmarking.
Hmm.
And that goes all the way back to the hundreds of years in
Yeah, I
the
never connected it to that. That's interesting. Yeah.
in the military. And then on Halloween Eve, my wife's throat was slit by a gay nurse. And when I go back to the day I found her dead in our home, and that was a Civil War ranch I got from Mr. Manning. And Manning co-created the JF archives with my alumni, Mr. Jim Garrison. I taught with Jim Garrison in Warren High School in that school system, as Webster funded it. And Webster was director of the FBI. And Webster put my stolen trademark in his dictionary after it was stolen.
Right. That was the topic of our last video. If anybody's watching this one and
Right.
wants to learn more about that.
And then the shovel, my second and only still loving wife, whose family buried Jimmy Hoffa and was with Jimmy Hoffa at the Sly Fox as he disappeared, and they already had a hole dug for him. And they stole my horse. They had introduced me to Whitey. Whitey sold me a car, and then the FBI detained me before they detained even Chucky O'Brien the next morning, because my mother-in-law was with Hoffa at the Sly Fox.
Yeah.
And all of this was a setup to me from the Westhouse family. And I had asked the Westhouse family to quit selling drugs and using my car to do it. The police would pull me over leaving work and ask to open my trunk, and I'd open my trunk and there would be pounds of marijuana in it, and that was coming from my wife and her brother, who were supplying the bikers, the outlaws and the renegades, with marijuana.
Mm.
And I don't know what else they were doing, but the police pulled me over twice like that, and I asked my wife to quit doing this twice and told her the police pulled me over and they know there's pounds of marijuana in my trunk. And she still continued to deal drugs using my property. And I had 5 kids. So the second time the police pulled me over and showed me the pounds of marijuana in my trunk in a car my wife was using, I filed for divorce. Now, she's the only family member who's still alive in my life. Nobody ever hurt her. And when I was 17 and she was 30, she told me a story about Shovel, a guy who would kidnap a man and his wife and make the husband watch the wife get raped, and then he'd kill them as the husband had to dig the wife's grave. And she's the only person on earth that told me about Shovel. And then
And you were hearing a guy with a shovel dragging it on the bricks of your house.
As they murdered my wife. That's correct.
Right.
After building a biker club at the end of my street.
You see, I find that fascinating. The movie with Rob Zombie has a character doing that exact thing that you were talking about there.
No, I don't know about that. All I know is that wife told me about it. And Shovel was a biker in the gangs that her father ran. Her father was a state policeman. He lost his job because he murdered an innocent person. He always bragged about that to me.
Yeah.
And then after I asked her to stop dealing drugs, 2 of her cousins tried to kill me in front of Bob Seeger's house in a city in Oakland County, near Union Lake, I believe it was. I could be wrong about that name. It's been a long time. I was 17, 18 at the time. And then her father aimed a night scope at me when I came after work to pick my kids and wife up and threatened to shoot me as I stood over a hole that he dug with a crane with his son that was filled in the day after Jimmy Hoffa disappeared. And my horse was also missing. So he stole my horse, and I believe he buried Jimmy Hoffa under my horse and a goat in that hole he and his son dug at G&G Auto. G&G Auto didn't exist then.
It might help you for the listener to understand that we're skipping over several decades here with pieces of the story. The rape with Osborn, that was back in 57. The Hoffa was murdered in 75, and Victoria was murdered in 2011, I believe.
Yeah, and it was all bikers and police. The police that would come out when my home was broken into and computers were stolen that were from the White House and Major Tom Garrett at CBS. And those hard drives had Hillary's emails on them.
Right.
The police that came out, they used fake names and badge numbers on a stack of break-ins, and even on the day my wife was murdered. And Victoria was my third murdered wife, 3.
Right.
Karen Nelson was murdered before her Christmas Day. My fiance, Terry Heath, who is William Heath, who protected New York in 1776, that's her family. She was murdered 7 years before Victoria at the same property. And then I had a 4th wife murdered when I moved off that property out to California. And all these murders were done by police and bikers.
Right.
And military men from the Vietnam War. And I don't think these things. I know these things. I took care of Karen Nelson, Terry Heath, and Victoria. And when I found them murdered, I knew they were murdered. And because I had nurses training, I gave them CPR, revived them, put them in hospitals, and they were murdered once again 35 days later after being tortured by the hospital staff and then murdered by the hospital staff. And all of this was done as Clinton and Obama were president. On the day Victoria, the woman behind me here on the moon, you can see she's standing, smiling, and we loved each other. She didn't have a bad case of MD. You said MS. She had muscular dystrophy, but women don't get bad cases of muscular dystrophy. They just carry the genes for it. And I married her when I was 45. We didn't plan on having any kids, and I took care of her. And she had her own job when Dr. Twine gave her a pill that destroyed her heart, her kidneys, and her stomach and upper intestine. And then when she was put in the hospital and they screamed Slater over Walter's phone, and Walter and Cronkite and Bobby Walters covered Kennedy's murder.
Right. So it's the way to connect part of what was going on from 1957, where the rapists were Osborn, and you were in Osborn's basement where you escaped and went past Patterson.
Correct.
And all
and
that.
Osborn was Oswald's bunkmate in the military.
In the military, right. And then they followed you to Tennessee to steal Kennedy's letters, pretending to be a ministry from Alaska.
I'm going to get to that.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to that. So anyways, they screamed Slater over the phone as my wife's ears were cut off, and she didn't die that day. They hid it. They put pillows all around my wife's head, hoping I wouldn't see her ears were missing. And I went in and gave her a hug and moved the pillows and her head around on the bed, and I noticed her ears were gone. And I brought it to the doctor's attention, and they didn't have an explanation. And then about 2 weeks after that, her throat was slit. And they never allowed her to wake up. She woke up once. They kept her sedated so she couldn't talk to me. But she woke up once, and the only thing she said to me is, "The people here are trying to hurt me." And I told her, "Yes, I know." And I had gone to 2 police stations and told them that her ears were missing for absolutely no reason. As the advocate, Miss Walters' phone was used, and as they cut her ears off, they screamed over the phone, and I was 100 miles away at home. They screamed over the advocate's phone, Slater. And the only Slater I know is a judge in Troy, Michigan, where my only living wife lived in a home. And Slater was a judge who most likely let Shovel out to murder my wife. And Slater is a judge, and he was also a politician in Troy, Michigan, Oakland County, where the Westhouse family murdered Hoffa. So I divorced her because she wouldn't stop selling drugs, and I had 5 kids. And back then, in the 60s and 70s, I mean, you'd get 30 years in Michigan for one joint. And she had pounds of marijuana in my trunk. And the police knew it was there. And she still didn't stop doing it. And then I had 2 people try to murder me. They drugged me, stole my car, stole an airplane, and then used the airplane to bring the drugs back into Michigan. And that's when the detective was having sex with my wife behind my back, and not this wife, my first wife, before I married into the Westhouse family. But all of those wives, my first wife, and then my 3rd, 4th, and 5th, 2 fiancés, and then my 3rd wife, and then my first wife, all of them were murdered except for the Westhouse woman. So I know the police who ran the drugs with the bikers murdered my wives. And just before the murders of 2 of my wives in Tennessee, the bikers from the Renegades and the Outlaws built a bike club right at the end of my street to murder my wives. Now, when I first moved to Tennessee, before I married the girl behind me here, Victoria, Tennessee Valley Authority owns Kinser Park. And we talked about the FBI and how I lived on Hoover Street. And I know all the FBI directors. Either I went to school with them or they kidnapped me when I was 4. And I moved to Tennessee because my oldest friend, his name was Don Duell. And after I escaped my rapist, they put me on an Indian reservation with Gordon Lightfoot, who wrote The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And the people in my neighborhood were merchant marines on the Edmund Fitzgerald. Sonny Barger was a merchant marine. He went out and created the Hells Angels chapter in California in 57 after my rape. And then I moved to Tennessee because Don Duell, I was leaving Michigan and I didn't have a destination. I had bought an RV and I wanted to get out of there because my oldest brother and my mother's two sisters had stolen my inheritance. They forged my name on stock and then gave me penny stock and ran off with my inheritance from my grandfather, Mr. Harris, who owned tractor companies and a welding company and a trucking company, the Harris family. And he had left me a lot of stock.
Yeah.
My half brother and my mother's two sisters stole that stock from me when my Aunt Gardner died. And even my Aunt Gardner's death certificate is a lie because she had a daughter and she was married to Mr. Gardner, and he went to jail for robbing a bank that she worked at, and he got a life sentence because he killed a guard. And her daughter lived down in Florida. Yet on her death certificate, my mother's sisters and the brother who stole my inheritance, they said that she was never married and had no family, and that was a lie. Number one, I'm her family. She had a daughter, and I met her husband in Marquette State Prison. She took me up to Marquette State Prison several times after I was raped at 4. She also took me to World's Fairs, spent a lot of money on me, flew me out to the World's Fair up in Calgary, took me to malls, took me to movies, let me go on every ride at the World's Fair. I mean, she spent thousands and thousands of dollars on me. And I know she had a husband, yet on her death certificate, they put never married.
That's pretty amazing, yeah.
As they stole my inheritance. So I moved to Tennessee because Don Dole told me he moved back to Tennessee. He told me this on the phone and in a letter. He moved back to Tennessee. So I moved to the area where he would have moved, only he wasn't there. He was still living in Michigan. He lied to me. And because he lied to me, the woman behind me was murdered, and 2 more wives were murdered.
Yeah.
And now he has a pacemaker, and he's about to die. I kept them on my friends list at Facebook long enough to check them out. And his friends are the people who kidnapped me when I was 4 and murdered my twin.
Yeah, in all these decades, he never offered a hand, lend a hand,
No,
or tell your story, or
he made fun about them raping me when I first added him as a friend. He made a joke about me being raped and tortured. And it didn't dawn on me that at that time that Osborn and Daryl Hall and Roseanne Barr and Kathy O'Brien and the people that covered up my torture and kidnap and rape with Senator Graham. The Graham family owns all the media in Detroit, even back in '57. It didn't dawn on me when I added him as a friend. He was still lying to me. So when I realized he was still lying to me, I removed and blocked him on Facebook. He'll probably see this video on YouTube and try to deny it, but it's truth. I grew up with Don Dole, and his friends are the very people who kidnapped and raped me and tortured me and murdered my twin. And he lied to me about Tennessee, and because I moved to Tennessee looking for my oldest friend, 3 of my wives were murdered.
Yeah.
By bikers related to Osborn and Daryl Hall. And there's more to this story. When I was married to Nancy, my first wife, my second wife's family, her mother and her cousin, the Cook family, came to me. They married Nancy's brother, who ran Fort Knox, and then they came to me the day they married him and asked me for sex. And that was my second wife's family, but I didn't know they were her cousins. So my second wife's mother and her cousins all asked me for sex while I was still a minor. I had married Nancy because she was 21 when she raped me at 14. Came back and told me she had a baby. She was pregnant, asked me for money to kill my daughter. And I told her, no, I'll marry you. And I married her at 15. And then my second wife's family, because Nancy had been kidnapped by bikers who her brothers was part of, the Renegades. And her father had on his farm all the time. And he was an ex-state policeman, and that's where they buried off.
Yeah.
Her mother and both her cousins were trying to have sex with me while I was still a minor. I wasn't even 17 years old. Her mother was in her 50s trying to have sex with me. And when I married my second wife, she was 12 years older than me. I was still a minor.
It's amazing.
You know.
Married twice before you're even 18. That's amazing.
And then their friends were all witches. And prior to Osborn and his friends kidnapping and murdering my twin, witches had kidnapped me or just used me in baby sacrifice ceremonies. They would dance around me. And
yeah, you said one of your earliest memories was seeing people dancing around you and being boiled in water.
It was all women. And then the woman whose mother and cousins married into Nancy, my first wife's family, and then came to me for sex on the same day they married them. And her mother was in her 50s when she did this.
Yeah. She
came to me and took her top off and showed me her breasts. I was still a minor.
Right.
You know, my father told me to report all these people for rape. I should have listened to him, but I didn't. The main
he should have done it. He was your father. I mean, good grief.
Yeah, him and my mother both could have, but they didn't do. My father's hands were cut off by Pratt on the day I was kidnapped, and my family member Admiral Byrd was murdered, and that's a whole other story. That's in your history book.
Yeah.
So I got 4 military people. I got a South Carolina cop who was right in the room with Victoria, the woman behind me, as her ears were cut off, and he did absolutely nothing to stop it, as Slater was screamed over her advocate, Mrs. Walters' phone, after the Walters family tried to hire me as an arsonist. And I should have went to the police when he did that, but I was renting a home from him, and I was afraid he'd throw me out on the street, and it was the only home I could find to rent.
Makes sense.
And I live next door to the guy that owns the Greenville Sun, and his main reporter, Mr. Coons, knew that 3 of my wives were murdered, and he did not write anything about any of the murders in the Greenville Sun.
Coons and Alex Jones. Unbelievable.
Yeah,
and not that Alex Jones, but different one.
And then Tom Garrett from the White House, he lied. I was a top seller on eBay, and that's how I supported Victoria behind me.
Yes.
So I could stay home with her and make her meals after her heart and kidneys failed because of another military man. Major Tom Garrett destroyed my eBay business telling lies. And he was mad because people had broken into my home and stolen the hard drives out of computers he sent me, and then he bought them back thinking the same hard drives would be in them, and they weren't. So he went on eBay and he lied. He would buy little things from me and lie about it.
Right.
Destroy my online business. And he did this as Victoria's throat was slit Halloween Eve. And he was Obama's press secretary in the White House from CBS. And Walters and Cronkite covered Kennedy's murder. And Victoria and Terry Heath were murdered on the Manning properties, and Manning co-created the JFK archives. Well, this is all crime centered around my kidnap with community.
It has to be coordinated. It has to be coordinated by the government, the FBI or something. Has to be.
Well, they put Major Tom Garrett as he destroyed my business, and my attorney was murdered on the same day my wife was. And I had hired him about her ears and about the hospital asking me to sign papers to murder her.
Yeah.
And she had been sitting up waiting to come home when they sodomized her and then started giving her transfusion. So I hired an attorney. That attorney was murdered on his way to the DA's office.
Yeah, Mr. Bowman.
Yeah, and Bauman was my secretary's brother from Michigan.
Yeah, in Michigan. The story how he even got there, that's amazing.
As I rented from Jack Ruby's trademark the Carousel, a factory. Jan Bauman, her brother, Mr. Bauman, the attorney in Tennessee, was murdered. And they said he died of a heart attack or something. The same as they said the doctor who was younger than me died of a heart attack jogging 5 minutes after I left his office when my daughter was kidnapped. Same method of operation.
Right.
I know it's the police and FBI doing this.
Obviously, it has to be. It's the only thing that could possibly make sense.
Well, the FBI, the director put my stolen trademark in his dictionary the day after it was stolen by 2,500 corporations who were all affiliated with DuPont and Claire Cummins. And then I'm the Fuller family. Cummins puts the engines in diesel trucks, and my family put the transmissions in them, Fuller.
Right.
This is all related crime, as they stole my inheritance, stole my mother's patents on buses, vans, milk trucks, and the Fuller transmission, as they murdered her entire family leaving church. And then Jimmy Hoffa was my family member. His son married into my family, Harris.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now we have Biden appointing Vice President Kamala Harris, whose real name is Emhoff,
right,
using my name, and she's a prosecutor who would have known L. Brooks Patterson, the same person who was delivering hookers. Till Bill Clinton, as he never solved a single child killing in Oakland County, and my twin was the first kid murdered. Only they don't even admit to that.
Right.
So
they changed that story all around.
So you have Dr. Twine, you have Major Tom Garrett, you have Bobby Walters, and you have the state cop, all in the military, and all of them helped murder my wife behind me on the Manning
right,
with bikers.
Right.
And then all the police who come out to my house for at least a dozen break-ins, her murder, Cherry Heath's murder, they all use fake names and badge numbers on the police reports. Every police report I have is a fake name and a fake badge number.
Right, and who could do that except for the FBI?
From Greenville, Tennessee.
Right.
And then the sheriff in Greenville, Tennessee, he gave me Detective Holt to look into my wife's murders. And then he pulled her off the case. And who's Holt? Holt is Sonny's and Cher's. That's Cher's mother, Holt.
Cher's mother, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm a music publisher on Broadway in New York.
Right, and that's Lester Holt today.
Yeah, and they just put Lester Holt to moderate the conventions. And this is the same family that covered up the murder of my wife. The sheriff, as he pulled Holtz off my wife's case, he says, it's not my fault the government's corrupt. That's what his own words.
Yeah.
So he didn't file murder charges because the government's corrupt.
And he's part of it. Yeah.
And then I went to Johnson City where they slit her throat Halloween Eve. And I had to argue with them for a week with the sheriff and the DA over my wife's murder in Johnson City Hospital. And he said, well, can't we just leave these murders up to God?
Somebody was telling him not to do anything. Yeah.
Government.
Right.
The FBI.
Exactly.
And this was a black sheriff. And then I came back to California after arguing. I got a murder case open because I wouldn't stop hounding the DA's office. And my attorney, Mr. Bauman, was murdered on his way to the DA's office.
Right.
Every day I went to the DA's office and hounded him. And then the DA told the sheriff to open the murder case. But they never tried. They never looked into Victoria's murder or Terry's murder. Terry,
Right.
on July 4th, my birthday.
Well, they'd have to shut down that hospital, that's for sure.
She made me a birthday cake, made love to me for 2 days, told me every time she walked the dog, somebody was stalking her. Half an hour after she told me somebody was stalking her, she was dead. And she told me the people stalking her were the same policemen who had kidnapped her out of her CPS office in Wisconsin. 2 off-duty police trashed her office and kidnapped her and drove her across 5 state lines illegally.
Yeah, this was Terry Heath that was murdered in 2003.
On my birthday, July 4th.
Right.
All of my wives have been murdered on a holiday. Just that should get somebody's attention.
Yeah, the police would, if they were anyways honest, they would have to see there's something wrong with that.
I posted these things in the Greenville Sun 3 days ago. They put up about Kinser Park, and I said, well, I live next door to the guy that owns the Greenville Sun, and you didn't even give my wives an obituary as they were murdered. And the people in Greenville laughed about it.
Even at the church.
Right on the newspaper's website, they were laughing about my wives being dismembered and murdered on the Manning Ranch in Greenville and Mossheim, Tennessee. Laughing about it, Greg. And this is where Andrew Johnson was president. They have a museum there across the street from where I married Victoria. And I wouldn't even be in that town if my friend, when I was 4 years old, hadn't lied to me and told me he moved back to Tennessee. Some friend, huh?
Right.
So I have no real friends. When I look back on my life, nobody helped me. No obituary for 4 murdered wives. No news about the murders and dismemberments. They were all dismembered.
Right.
2 of them on the Manning Ranch. One told me she was being stalked by the policeman that kidnapped her in Wisconsin out of her CPS office as she protected little kids from the porno industry on the Great Lakes. And that's the same thing Osborn and Andrews and Anderson and Wallace and Long were trying to do to me, sell me as a sex slave in gay bars in California. They kept trying to put me on seaplanes on the Great Lakes. And they were doing the same thing when Terry ran a CPS office in Wisconsin in 2001.
That's not that long ago.
They were still doing it. And they fly him to Van Nuys, where Osborn runs the sex crime division at the FBI, making porno movies with one kid. The boy was 3 and his sister was 7. Terry was protecting them in her Head Start CPS office. 2 off-duty policemen kidnapped her and drove her across 5 state lines illegally. Then
Right,
she
because they
told me
were
on the
making
day
pornos with the
she
kids.
told me
Yeah.
on the day she was murdered, the same policemen were stalking her every time she walked a dog in Tennessee on our
Jeez.
farm. She told me they were hiding in the barn, and it was a barn I didn't use. It was falling down. I told her to stay out of it. They were staying in the barn and then stalking her every time she walked her dog. And then on my birthday, they hung her in her dog's leash.
Right.
Those same two cops from Wisconsin.
Just like the movie. They'd done that. They done the same thing in
I'm going to share this screen now and show everybody some pictures.
Yeah.
And explain the pictures.
Friday the 13th Part 2. They did the same thing. The two girls, Terry and Victoria.
Can you see the share?
Yeah.
Now, this first girl, this is Kiki Nelson. This is Willie Nelson's family from Missouri. She was murdered Christmas Day. And then when I went back in 2017 and sat in L. Brooks Patterson's office before he died, attempting to file murder charges against Osborn and Darrell Hall and Anderson and Andrews, our daughter was murdered, Serena. She was 30. And on that same day, my nephew was murdered, Tony Jr., and my bass player's son was murdered, another Tony Jr. And two of my family members were murdered in Indiana. All in the same day, at the same time I sat in L. Brooks Patterson's office. And he never took a statement from me.
Wow.
About my twins' murder and my rape in Governor Osborne's basement.
Jeez.
Then he died of colon cancer. And all his friends were gay people.
Yeah, and he was replaced by a gay.
Yeah, and put it together. Yeah, another gay took his place. And put it all together. Why do people die of colon cancer?
Right.
After having gay sex all their life.
Right, right.
This next photo is my last murdered wife. That's Nancy Lavoie. She was dismembered and then she was murdered on the day the FBI shot Lavoie Finicum. Her name is Nancy Lavoie. I divorced her in 70 or 71 because she tried to stab me and throw me down a flight of stairs after I caught her having sex with a police detective who was supposed to protect me. She built up a story in her schizophrenic mind that I was cheating on her when I wasn't and tried to murder me. So on that day, I divorced her. I told her from the bottom of 2 flights of stairs where she threw me down after stabbing me, I told her I'm not coming back. She called the police in Utica, Michigan, and told them I beat her up, which was a complete lie. She stabbed me and threw me down a flight of stairs while I had toolboxes in both my hands. I had come home from my first job, made her and my kids dinner, and I picked up my toolboxes to go to my second job, and she ran up behind me with a butcher knife and tried to kill me.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking in her schizophrenic mind that I had a girlfriend and I was going to work.
Right.
That was Nancy Lavoie. She was murdered at the same time they shot Lavoie Finicum.
On 2015.
And that was my first wife, and she raped me at 21 in front of her mother's house when I was 14. Came back and asked me for money to get an abortion. I told her no, I'll marry.
Yeah, 14-year-old.
My own father told me to charge her with rape. I didn't. I married her so my child would live. I don't believe in abortion.
Right.
This is Terry Heath. Can you see her?
Yes.
Did it zoom for you?
Yes.
This is William Heath. William Heath's family, Sarah Heath Palin's family. And this was why Sarah Heath Palin was with McCain, is because the Heath family protected New York. He was a brigadier general working for my family, George Washington, in 1776. They murdered her on my birthday, 2 off-duty policemen.
Makes a lot of sense because Heath helped win the revolution on July 4th. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and then, Donald Trump says he's better than George Washington, and they keep trashing. One of his Republicans said that the Constitution is junk yesterday.
Yeah.
And my family wrote it. America.
Well, that's what I think.
America would not exist without that woman's family, Terry Heath.
Right.
Brigadier General. He protected and pushed the British out of New York.
Yeah, he gave the book to Rufus Putnam that he used to learn how to build the fortifications at Dorchester Heights in Boston.
Yeah. And then Washington handed my family his sword in the first Mason's Lodge. They were using the Mason lodges to plan the war against King George. And then as soon as the war was over, they no longer went to the lodges. And then everybody says they're Illuminati.
Look how amazing this history is with the museums around here. They don't
tell you anything. And then they've hidden me all my life. And the people that hid me is the very family that was taking hookers to Bill Clinton, Perry, and Cook. These are my only living wife's family members. And
Cook and Perry.
They murdered my next 2 fiancés and 2 wives. And they've hidden me. And you know yourself, my family members are buried all over that museum, cemetery.
Yeah.
This is my wife, Nancy, or not Nancy. This is my wife, Victoria, whose ears were cut off and her throat slit Halloween Eve. Her first husband, when I stopped the drug trade in Utica, Michigan, he was one of the drug dealers with a sheriff in Harrisville, Michigan. He broke both her legs. You see, she can't walk there because her legs are broken. He broke both her legs and moved her 12-year-old babysitter in, threw her out of a house she bought, and left her on the street with 2 broken legs.
And then when she got a job, started making her pay them.
Yeah.
While she's hobbling in on her arms to get into work.
The judge in her and Vicky's case gave Vicky custody of her 2 boys.
Yes.
And the judge and her boyfriend murdered the judge's husband. So all the cases got turned around. The sheriff in Harrisville, who was selling drugs and prostitutes with her first husband, who stole her house, with her 12-year-old babysitter. He was 35, she was 12. He moved the babysitter in, started banging her, and the sheriff wouldn't give Vicky her kids back because the judge and her boyfriend had murdered another man. So I ended up paying child support for Vicky's 2 kids for over 14 years. And when Tom died, the sheriff and Tom died coming out of jail after serving 5 or 6 years for selling the drugs that I stopped in Utica, Michigan. The sheriff was helping Tom, her biker husband, sell the drugs. Just like in Tennessee, the entire police force that used fake names and badge numbers went to jail, Greg.
Yeah.
For selling drugs and prostitutes. Just like her husband, Tom. And I'm the guy that stopped the drug trade from Noriega. I bought property from Mazar, Trump's tax attorney,
Mm-hmm.
and all the people that lived in the houses behind my main house in the worker houses were drug dealers. They were pharmacists and drug dealers. And then I was put by the police and FBI in jail for a year for stopping an illegal gun and drug trade. And they made movie stars out of all the drug dealers. And there were little kids, 3, 5, 7 years old, overdosed in my driveway, getting drugs off of Good Humor trucks the day I moved in.
Good Humor ice cream.
That's why I stopped the drug trade, and I had no idea it was the Senate gun and drug trade.
Right.
And it was illegal being run with the president and the CIA.
Right. Nobody knew Tom Hanks back then. Right. That was part of the cover-up.
He got his job, and Tom and Hanks were both drug dealers.
Right.
Here's May. Can you read this?
Yeah, I can read that. This is Thomas Garrett. Thomas A. Garrett.
I will pray for this man to overcome his nervous condition. He thinks I'm nervous as he's lying about things he bought, and he didn't get Clinton's emails back on the computers he sent me from the FBI, Greg. They were right out of the White House, from the FBI in the White House.
Yeah.
And because my home was broken into and the hard drive stolen, he didn't get them back. So then he destroyed my online business. My lawyer was murdered on his way to the DA. And then they put him on CBS. They put him on the takeout and gave him a raise. As he destroyed my, and I was a top seller at eBay. And then he's saying I have a nervous condition. I don't have a nervous condition. Do I seem nervous to you, Greg?
Not a bit.
There it is. Major Tom Garrett at CBS in the White House, Obama's press secretary, destroyed my only income, murdered my attorney on the same day my wife's throat was slit. And then CBS put him on the takeout. As Slater was screamed over the phone as my wife's ears were cut off, and the phone belonged to Mrs. Walters. You got this picture?
Yeah.
Then here's all the transfusions. Transfusions. Can you read that?
Right.
After my wife was unconscious, got a battery put in her pacemaker, unconscious in a room, 2 gay nurses sodomized her, and then she had to get transfusions for a month. And I told the doctor his nurses sodomized my wife.
Yeah. Jeez.
You got this picture? And he denied it. Getting a battery put in a pacemaker and defibrillator has nothing to do with bleeding out your rectum.
Right.
And there was nothing wrong with her. And they murdered her after cutting her ears off. I mean, imagine what a lawsuit that is. No ears. And you go into the hospital because somebody murdered you, and then all of a sudden you don't have any ears. You've been sodomized, and then they slit your throat. They didn't want the lawsuit, right? And then in that hospital, there were so many actors hired who met me at the front door of the hospital. It's just unbelievable. As CBS put Tom Garrett on the takeout.
Yeah, they were asking you ahead of time if
Now, I'm not going to say this little boy's name.
Well, I thought you'd say more about the actors at the hospital.
Well, no, it doesn't matter. We've said it in other videos.
Yeah, all right.
This little boy was being abused as the Tennessee Valley Authority brought Osborn from Alaska back into my life to run Kinser Park. and Patsy Anderson was looking after him. And this is Jane Cotton, who married Osborn, and that's Senator Cotton's family. And this is Andrea Osborn, the family that kidnapped me at 4 and murdered my twin. And you see how they're dressed up?
Yeah.
Tennessee Valley Authority flew them back from Alaska to run the park I rented a spot in. A month after I started living there in Kinser Park. This is the very.
And they stole the Kennedy letters out of your RV.
Yeah, they broke into my home and my RV and stole handwritten letters from John F. Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, and Ted Kennedy.
Yes.
The Osborn and Cotton family. And then Coons, another senator, Senator Coons, Senator Cotton. They're senators right now today.
Yeah.
And they both married into this Osborn family that kidnapped me with Camille Sirhan in 1957. They owned a ministry in Alaska called Divine Time Ministry. They came to the Tennessee Valley Authority, Kinser Park, stole my Kennedy letters, and then they told me, the kid whose twin they murdered and tortured and raped me, they would torture me by hitting my thighs with a 2x4 while I was on my knees.
Right. We were able to show through the cemetery here in Marietta how Cotton and it's Cotton Mather's family, and Cotton Mather and that's the judge in the Salem witch trials, and Osborn was one of the people hanged in the Salem witch trials. It's unbelievable how far back this history goes.
No, it goes all the way back to the original colonies, and I'm well aware of this. They owned a ministry, and they told me, after murdering my twin, torturing and raping me, they told me I needed to be baptized. And I'd already been baptized 5 times in 5 different churches, Greg. But I needed to be baptized, not them.
Right.
And they own the ministry. You got this picture?
Right.
Then this is Adrian Osborn. And this is all at Kinser Park. This is a country store at Kinser Park. This is Alka-Seltzer, toothpaste. It's the store in Kinser Park that Tennessee Valley Authority owns. So these people, they kidnapped me and my twin, bring my twin back from California with Camille Sirhan's family. And this is the very family that did it. And then Tennessee Valley Authority puts him in charge of the park, Greg.
This will be Mac Osborn's family.
Then here's Jane Cotton married to Adrian Osborn. And together they all own a ministry and tell me I need to be baptized after they murder my twin and rape me and torture me at 4. I was 4 years old, Greg.
Right.
Then this is Jane Cotton here, right here, the big fat girl, and Adrian Osborn. Andrea Osborn. And all of them, Andrea and Adrian Osborn, they all had names starting with A's. Jane Cotton married Adrian Osborn. This woman was married to Metcalf. This is Steve Deerstone, and I believe this is his wife. The Tennessee Valley Authority put him as in charge of the camp. This is the dollar store again that the Osborn family ran. His name is Deerstone. And then remember, Mick Jagger came across the Stones singing about he killed the Kennedys, remember? Yeah. And this is Deerstone with the family that raped me. And then this is Mr. Metcalf. This guy with his hands out. He ran they have a big slide in Kinser Park. You go down it and you end up in a pool. And that's his sister-in-law, Andrea Osborn. So the whole Osborn family and Metcalf family ran Kinser Park because of the Tennessee Valley Authority and the Greenville Commission who put them there. As I moved there, a month after I moved there, and these people stole my handwritten letters. I told the sheriff they stole my letters, and they did nothing about it. The same sheriff that said it's not his fault the government's corrupt and didn't file my wife's murder charges. And you see here the sign down here, it says Fire Starter 24. And this is the general store in Kinser Park. And these are the people, the very people who kidnapped me at 4 ran the park after I moved into it. This is the sheriff, the Tennessee Valley Authority. That's the park's ranger with Jane Cotton and Andrea Osborn in the general store. And the Tennessee Valley Authority set all these people up after I moved, a month after I moved in. And I'm certain they did it for the FBI, Greg.
There can be no question in my mind.
And then here's, see the note 10, 20, 11? This is a week before Halloween when they slit Victoria's throat. This is 2 weeks after I put her in the hospital. She's getting transfusions because two male nurses sodomized her. Then they cut her ears off. And this is Todd Bird, my family member, leaving me a note. Can you read it?
Yeah, to Victoria's family, I visited this afternoon to offer my support and care. Please know you are in my thoughts and prayers. Peace, Toddy Bird.
Yeah, that's the Bird family, my cousins. Visiting my wife just before her throat was slit. Her throat was slit Halloween Day. And in that year, Halloween Day was the 27th or 28th in that part of Tennessee. So the Bird family was praying for my wife after I found her murdered. And then they murdered her a second time in Johnson City, Tennessee. And then who was Johnson, Greg?
Who was Johnson, Kennedy's vice president there?
Yeah, and he called my family's home about 5 murdered kids as he took office. They were murdered at the same time John F. Kennedy was murdered.
Yeah.
And then he was dating Madeline Duncan Brown, and I'm the Brown family. And my father had just stopped Mr. Brown from selling guns and drugs, just like Noriega in the Senate in my lifetime was doing in Utica, Michigan, as they murdered Kiki Christmas Day.
Yeah, when you were a kid, the Brown kids were living with you for a while there.
Yeah. Rosemary Brown and her husband lived with me because their house burned down. I gave them my bedroom to live in.
Right.
In a house I bought for my parents. And this was
so Johnson calls and says
this was as Kennedy was murdered, and as Johnson was dating Madeline Duncan Brown, and the Duncan kids were murdered, Greg.
The Duncan kids were murdered, right?
5 Duncan kids, and everybody had a Duncan yo-yo.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't have computers back then. Everybody had Duncan yo-yos. They murdered 5 Duncan kids. Johnson called my house about the kids next door being murdered.
Yeah, that's it.
This is after they brought my identical twin back from California with Camille Sirhan. Camille Sirhan married my cousin Pete. And at that wedding, that's when Bobby was killed. And then they told you that Sirhan murdered Bobby. And this is the biggest BS story there ever was.
Right.
And Oswald didn't kill Kennedy. Osborn, Governor Osborn and his friends murdered Kennedy. Oswald's bunkmate in the military. This is my band, Bottom Line. You can see the sign, half the sign, Bottom Line Band. I'm the drummer. Can you see that?
Yeah.
That's Kent Kowalski, Dwayne Kowalski. This is my little brother who thought he could steal my publishing company, Bottom Line Publishing in New York. Him and Westfall tried to steal this band, and they were successful at it for about 2 weeks. And then Westfall died in a plane crash, and I had nothing to do with that. And then here I am. I'm here, the second from the left, or maybe it's the right in this video. I don't know. This is Dwayne Kowalski, Kent Kowalski, my little brother Frank, and I taught him how to play that bass guitar he's playing. And this is me. On the front page, on the front page of the Tribune. As Kennedy started off his speeches, to you Tribune publishers. This is my baby picture taken on 9/11, 1953. Notice the 4-4 in the corner?
Yeah.
And who took the photo?
George Towers.
Oh, and where? Rogue, Detroit. Oh, where did D.B. Cooper jump out of the airplane? On the Rogue River. You see the history even in my baby pictures, Greg.
Right. And it even ties it to 1963.
And the FBI and the CIA and all media is hiding all of this.
But look at 1963, the 35th president was Kennedy, murdered in 63, and that's the numbers down there.
Yeah. And I'm this kind of history my whole life through. This is my baby picture, the day I was born. Taken on 9/11, 1953.
Right. George Bush and the Twin Towers. It's unreal.
Yeah, and the towers weren't even built yet. So what does that tell? They planned all of this.
They planned it from the top before they even built it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it's on Pratt Street. And Pratt cut my father's hands off on the day Admiral Byrd was murdered. And I and my twin were kidnapped with Camille Sirhan.
Yeah.
The twin was murdered by 5 gay men in Governor Osborn's basement. And Osborn runs the FBI right now.
Right.
He runs the sex crime division in California in Van Nuys.
Wow.
And he ran it with his sister, remember?
Yeah.
The Osborn family, the same family that kidnapped me. And they hide me in all media. I'm the guy I had 12 FBI agents come out guns drawn in front of my kids as I got out of my work truck and detain me in front of my children. And told me I murdered Hoffa. That's what they told me.
Yeah.
I was 19 years old. I had just adopted 5 kids. Sure, I did. He was my own family member. I was in his union. He was giving me enough money to feed those 5 kids I just adopted.
Right.
I'm sure I murdered them.
Yeah, really.
You know. And no news about any of this. And then I bought Miller a house. Miller and Tony Tocco worked for me. As I rented Jack Ruby's Carousel. They worked for me. I bought Miller his house. They wrote books and said, Hunt and Miller killed Hoffa. Hunt was my next door neighbor, Greg. Lived right next door to the house I bought for my father. They hid all of my whole life, and this is FBI hiding my life. After they murdered John F. Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy. And then Hubert Hoover, and I grew up on Hoover Street, funded my school system. Webster, the director of the FBI, funded my school system, Greg.
Yeah, right.
I went to school with Mueller. I went to school with Al Capone's family. They renamed Al Capone's family Rutledge, and they put him in my high school, in my junior high school. And then in Chicago today, look how many policemen are a member of Trump's Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers.
Yeah.
Dozens of policemen in Chicago. Oh, gee, I used to hitchhike to Chicago and entertain the vets in Chicago, playing music right in the hospital in Chicago.
It's interesting. Proud Boys is run by the Brits.
Oh, is
And they're
it?
the first ones to break the windows in Trump's attack on the Capitol building. Proud Boys broke the first windows.
Yeah, it all figures, Greg. And it all comes right back to my life in this tower. This picture taken by George Towers. And this was developed by Eastman. And Eastman told Trump to steal the White House.
That's right.
Unbelievable.
So the Brits have attacked the White House directly twice. That time there on January 6th and back in the War of 18.
And then I'm going to mention here. I'm going to mention here that my civil rights case was against the Groves family, who built the Pentagon. On 9/11, they blew my civil rights case up in the Pentagon office. And the last plane in Pennsylvania crashed in a field where my wife, Victoria, whose ears were cut off and throat slit, that's where she was born. And that's where my twin's body was dumped also. Anything else to add, Greg?
No, I'm getting real tired, Hugh. I got to go to bed. As interesting as it is, I'm going to have to get it. But that's
so this year, as Cher says, Greg, as Cher says, she's going to leave the country if Trump becomes president again, and her family is going to be the moderator at a GOP convention.
Who said that?
Cher. Cher's going to leave the country if Donald Trump gets elected. But Mr. Holt at NBC is going to moderate the GOP convention.
Unreal.
And Mrs. Holt is Cher's mother. Bye.
Right. Bye.
I'll see you tomorrow.